We're incredibly excited to talk to Dr. Katie Armstrong, a GP and women's health specialist, on this week's episode of the Midlife Mentors. Katie shares an enormous amount of information with us about HRT, what it is, why we might need it, who it's for, and the pros and cons of certain types of HRT solutions.
We know without a doubt that you'll find this a fascinating, empowering and insightful episode with plenty of aha moments. You may even want to grab a pen and paper and make notes. Hi, I'm James Davis.
And I'm Claire Davis.
We're the Midlife Mentors, here to lift the lid on how to achieve health and happiness.
The balanced, no-nonsense way.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Midlife Mentors with me, James.
And me, Claire. How are you all doing out there?
Well, we are celebrating a long Jubilee weekend over here in the United Kingdom.
We are.
We spent yesterday up on Primrose Hill watching the red arrows and a big fly past down in Soho, soaking out the atmosphere.
Yes, all with Mummy and Daddy Wiley, my parents. I was very blessed to still have them with me. So it was just gorgeous to celebrate with them and take them around London. It wasn't too busy, actually, was it? It was quite, the atmosphere was just lovely.
Great atmosphere, everyone out like waving their Union Jacks around, pictures of the Queen everywhere.
Exactly. So what else have we been up to? Normally we've got lots and lots of updates, but I think because of going into a long bank holiday weekend, we've allowed ourselves a bit of balance and to take it a little bit easy, haven't we? Although you've got your andropause workshop.
I'm doing an andropause workshop on Tuesday evening. So guys who are kind of 45 plus, do tune into that. I'll be talking through the symptoms of the andropause and the lifestyle adjustments you can make to help you work with it.
Yeah.
On Saturday, we're actually up north.
We sound so southern there, don't we? How very rude.
Fitness Festival.
Yes, we are.
And we just confirmed an event for July as well.
Yes.
In London, but we can't say too much about that at the moment.
So guys, what I'll do is, and also ladies, if you have a man in your life that you think would be interested in that workshop with James, it's absolutely amazing. And these are the sorts of workshop that James does with our corporates. So like a Citibank, he's gone and done that for a workshop with them. All around this, and it was an absolute hit. So you don't want to miss that. And I'll put the link to join that in the show notes. So ladies, if you've got a man that you think would be interested, do put it in front of their noses. And guys, just sign up at the link in the show notes. And Jones, I hope to see you there.
We will. Now, today's show actually is probably more for the ladies. So men, this is actually really interesting for you as well, if you're understanding what your partner is going through as well. And we're thrilled to be joined by a very special guest, Dr. Katie Armstrong of Clinic 51. Good morning, Katie.
Good morning, Katie. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. It's great to be here on a very beautiful, sunny bank holiday. I've just been saying I've got COVID, so I am confined to barracks. But at least the sun is shining, and I've got a nice garden.
Otherwise, you would have been on that balcony at Buckingham Palace yesterday, wouldn't you?
Otherwise, I would have been there with her. I would have been. She was very disappointed. Me and Andrew. But
you're isolating with Andrew.
Yes,
what a treat.
Yes.
Don't start horrible gossip.
We haven't even got into the podcast yet, and here we are scraping the barrel. It really is really strange though that he got COVID, isn't it? I'm just putting that out there.
Very strange.
Very
coincidence.
What a coincidence. He's not able to make it. But we're really, really thrilled to have Katie here. It was actually one of our lovely clients that put us in contact with Katie. And we're very pleased she did, because we already had a lovely chat before this podcast. We were like, we really, really, really need to get Katie on, talking about what we're going to talk about today, which we'll intro in a minute, which is, well, it's all around HRT, basically. It's not one of the areas we know very much about. We are not doctors, so it's amazing that we've got Katie here giving us the lowdown on all this stuff. But then we'll probably get Katie on again at some point, talking about some other topics that we brainstormed when we spoke before this podcast. So, Katie, there we are. We've kind of introed you.
Do you want to give us a little intro? Just give us a brief, your background and what you do.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I am a GP by training. and have worked in the NHS as a GP for, golly, almost 20 years. I run Clinic 51, which is a private women's health and menopause clinic in beautiful West Sussex, where I see mainly menopausal and perimenopausal women, but also see women dealing with other hormonal difficulties, so bad PMS, PMDD, and I even see some teenagers going through puberty and struggling. And basically I got into this because I'm a perimenopausal woman, and as a doctor and the women's health expert in my practice, I really realized as I went through it myself how little I knew. And I'm saying this with the greatest respect to other doctors, but I think that we get very, very bad menopause training, both as GPs and as gynecologists. It's practically non-existent. You know what happens hormonally, you know that it exists, but really that is it. So it was always a bit of a lottery, prescribing HRT, having a feeling that you maybe weren't giving the right advice. So I went on a quest myself to learn and understand more. And through that, one, felt amazingly better myself, could sleep for the first time in 2.5 years, but also realized as I put it into practice just how transformational it was for patients, and that was what really started the seed of Clinic 51 for me. And I'm very blessed to be able to do a job that is just the most rewarding and meet so many amazing ladies, but really help them to not let hormones rule their life, to help put them back into control today. So that's what I want to, I'm really excited to be with you and share some of that knowledge to hopefully help. I don't believe that HRT is for everybody, but I do believe that everybody should understand it so they can make the right choice for them.
Absolutely. And I just want to say as well, I also put a shout out a while ago about someone to do a podcast like this around HRT, and Katie's name was mentioned a lot. So it wasn't just from this one client of ours. Katie was mentioned a lot. So that just goes to show that word of mouth is incredibly powerful. So just wanted to put that out there. So the first question that we've got for you, I suppose, Katie, is, we hear a lot about HRT, but for those that don't know, could you just explain the basics of what it is and who it's actually for?
Yeah, of course. And probably what I should have said at the beginning is a slight disclaimer, is that all of my training, it's really important for me as a doctor that everything I do is evidence-based. So my training is via the British Menopause Society, and everything I say today is based on their guidance and guidance that NICE, the Home of Evidence-Based Medicine, published actually back in 2015 on menopause. So just to give you that kind of context, that this isn't, I think sometimes you listen to people and you think, really? So that's my caveat before we start. So what is HRT? Well, it's been interesting because there's been a real push to call it something different, and in different countries they've now I'm trying to think what they call it, something different in Australia anyway, because we've had 20 years of very bad press around these three letters. But if we break it down, HRT is hormone replacement therapy, and actually it's a good name because that's what it is. So the three female hormones, the three hormones that our ovaries produce when they work, are estrogen, progesterone and testosterone. And so actually at its most basic, HRT is estrogen, progesterone, and potentially testosterone, replacing what your body would normally produce. So it's helpful just to understand a little bit about what your own hormones do, to understand what HRT does. So as women, it is eggs maturing in our ovaries that are the main source of hormones. We're born with a finite number of eggs. We can't make eggs. They're produced when we're embryos in our mother's womb. I think that sort of blows my mind a little bit.
Me too.
And we start with about 1 million of them. And from puberty onwards, we work our way through them. And so it is an inevitability that women, if they live long enough, are going to come to the end of their eggs. And that essentially is menopause. Menopause is when your eggs have run out and when you haven't had a period for a year. But for up to 10 years before that, your hormones are going to fluctuate. And this is not some switch doesn't get flicked in your body. It is basically that you are just running low on your egg reserves. And the eggs that you've got have been around for 40 plus years at that stage. So, you know, if you think about it a bit like, I always think like soldiers, troops at barracks, you know, you're on to the ones that are reserve troops, you know, they've maybe not been exercising quite as much. They've been eating a few pies.
I love that analogy. That's amazing.
so I mean, it doesn't work for everybody, but you know, it's and I equally at the other end, I always think that puberty is like those really keen 17-year-olds, like keen as mustard, but a bit chaotic.
It's like a warrior woman.
Exactly. Well, maybe we need to think about, yeah, exactly. These are female soldiers.
Yeah.
Anyway, so basically this period of perimenopause is just your ovaries shutting down. But what's really important to know as a woman is that over this period, a major physiological change happens in your body. So when your ovaries shut down, you lose 90% of your body's estrogen production, you lose most of its progesterone production, and you lose 50% of its testosterone production. So that is a really, really major change. The other little analogy I'm going to give you, because I think it's helpful to sort of work out how your body might be dealing with this, is when your hormones are, when your ovaries are working and your hormones are there, think of it as being in a lit room. When your ovaries are slowing down, think of it like a flickering light bulb. The light bulb needs changing and it's on off, and then it might be on for a little bit. Oh, and then it's off for a bit. And you don't know whether you're coming or going. And you can't do anything because it's not constant. You know, you just don't know what's going on. That's perimenopause. Then the light goes out. The bulb is finished, your eggs are done. And actually it is worth also remembering that often is 2 or 3 years after you finished your periods. And you're in a dark room, but the body is clever, the body can adapt. So much like being in a dark room, your eyes adjust, don't they? You can begin to see in the dark, and actually it's probably a more pleasant place than in a room with a flickering light bulb. And that's the same with menopause, that once your ovaries are finished, the body goes, oh, well, at least it's stable. At least now I can adapt to something that is different. But it is really worth knowing that it is a very different place to be. And that is important because whilst some of your symptoms might improve, and it makes sense, doesn't it, that the symptoms are not going to be the same the whole way through, that your symptoms when hormones are fluctuating are going to be that of, I don't like the change, but symptoms of low hormones are going to be different, are going to be those symptoms of where estrogen is really pivotal in the body's functioning. So for example, the genitourinary tract, and sleep, muscles and joints. But also estrogen is there behind the scenes, is our biological hormone of reproduction. It is there not only to get us pregnant, to keep us pregnant, but it's also there to make our bodies strong enough to maintain pregnancies. So behind the scenes, it's maintaining our bone density, it's looking after our cardiovascular system, it keeps our blood vessels nice and elastic, it stops our blood vessels from furring up. It's really important for brain function, and for the sort of cleaning waste process of the brain, with just understanding more about estrogen and testosterone and their function on the brain. So once that estrogen level has dropped, even if you're feeling better, your body is a very different place. And I think every woman, and I know you talk about this a lot, needs to understand, HRT or not, that you must look after your body when you are from midlife onwards, because you haven't got that protective effect of estrogen. So suddenly you cannot get away with what you could in your 20s and 30s. So that, more than anything, is my most important message for today. Understand what's happening to your body, and understand that that means that you need to protect and care for this precious vessel we have. The other thing I'm just going to flip in here before we actually talk about HRT is the fact that, you know, well, this is a natural process, isn't it? It's not a disease. Yes, it is. But does that mean that we have to endure it? No, it doesn't. Does it mean that it is therefore good for us. Well, I just want to just say, if we go back 100 years, for thousands of years, up until about 100 years ago, women would only live 2 or 3 years in menopause. So our bodies were very cleverly designed to give us enough eggs to last us until a point when we were too frail, essentially, to continue the human race. In the last 100 years, we have had improvements in nutrition, we have had sanitation, we have had immunization, we've had contraception, meaning that women aren't dying in childbirth. Our life expectancy has gone up by at least a third, and our ovaries just haven't caught up. So it is arguable that as female human beings, we are not designed to live a long period of time without estrogen. So that's my sort of background caveat. I now might actually answer your question.
That's honestly, Katie, it's absolutely fascinating. And I have to say, it is so, even for me that does know elements of this, not around the HRT, but the symptoms around perimenopause and menopause, and you know, how we need to protect our bodies moving into that period even more so, and all these sorts of things. But even for me, it brings so much compassion to the stuff that I've been going through. You know, last year I was going through all sorts of crazy sorts of symptoms, and I now know that yes, it could have been a slight post-viral fatigue thing, but I'm 100% sure it was some perimenopausal symptoms flickering that light. And when you say it's flickering the light and then it goes, and you don't really know what to do about that because it's not constant. When something's constant, you're like, okay, this must be this. But you think you're going a bit mad and that there must be something else that's wrong, because that light keeps going on and off, on and off. So one minute you're thinking, I feel energized now. Okay, I've got my mojo back. And the next moment, a few weeks later, it's taken back from you again. And it's really hard.
That's one of the cruelest things about perimenopause, because often just as you feel like I've got to do something about this, you then feel better again. And you're like, oh, it's all going to be all right now. And as women, I think we often tend to put our own health and well-being absolutely at the bottom of the list. You know, we are very used to, we just get on with it, don't we? And I also think we're not very kind to ourselves. So I think we, you know, which, oh, goodness sake, of course, you know, you just need to get on with it. And if anything, I think we do need to have, again, compassions for this the amazing vessel that we are in, and it is trying to tell us something. If we're positive about those perimenopausal symptoms, it is our body going, oh my God, something's changing. Could you change the light bulb, please? You know, it's telling us, you know, whoa, be ready for a different physiological state.
Yes, or like learning how to be with your body differently. Actually, how to be with your body differently. What you used to do doesn't work anymore. Exactly. You know, it's about listening to it, it's almost like that conversation with it, becoming more compassionate with it, and learning what works around this time when you are having a dip, working out what helps.
And, you know, and I think when we look at the fact that, you know, it is hard to find a cell in the female body that doesn't have an estrogen receptor on it. You know, that is because the body is so clever. You know, if we think about the estrogen as the hormone of biologically of reproduction, of continuing the human race, it realizes that it is not just about ovaries and a womb. One, you need to get pregnant, so you need to attract a mate. Two, your body needs to be physically strong enough. And that's when you begin to think of, why am I getting these symptoms? You know, women who have tinnitus or balance problems, well, of course, there's loads of estrogen receptors in the inner ear, because when you're heavily pregnant, you need to be able to balance, don't you? You know, estrogen's an anti-inflammatory, because again, you need that effect when you're pregnant. So you begin to go, oh wow, estrogen's like a balm on our brain, again, because it gives us a biological advantage when we're pregnant and bringing up small children. So you suddenly be estrogen for our skin. You know, estrogen builds collagen, which is the building blocks of our skin, and promotes hyaluronic acid formation, which is the stuff that actually keeps moisture in our skin. So it's not, you know, when you hear people talk about dryness at menopause, you think about maybe secretions, but it's like an intracellular dryness, you know, and that's down below. And it's, you know, all the women perimenopausally going, oh, I just seem to get thrush every month. Just before my period, I'm always getting thrush. You're not getting thrush. you know, just before your period is the time that your estrogen level is at its lowest. And these are, you know, those perimenopause, perimenopause, I don't mean that. I mean premenstrual, that's my COVID brain. Those premenstrual symptoms, the symptoms in the week before your period, are a real telltale sign of hormones being astray. You know, suddenly not sleeping, getting sweaty before your period, feeling worse PMS, suddenly, you know, itching down below. All of them are signs just of how powerful these hormones are in our body. You know, these are very basic primal things.
It is so fascinating. I just want to say one more thing as well, because actually around estrogen and the production of serotonin. So obviously in the gut, you know, and that's why what we do kind of complements this so much. It's kind of the lifestyle strategies around gut health as well. Because obviously when estrogen is really linked to the production and the transportation of serotonin as well. So no wonder also that we feel really low on mood, and then that is impacted if we're eating too much sugar and drinking too much alcohol and these sorts of things. So it's so highly attuned.
And one of the things that definitely happens, and you'll see this all the time, is that when, particularly in perimenopause, when you are feeling crap, but often in a really non-specific kind of way, because it is a bit like sort of death by a thousand cuts, isn't it? Do you know, like lots and, you know, so you can have one really awful symptom, or you can have lots and lots of little bits that you don't really, just sort of each one by itself isn't enough to be awful, but put it all together. And of course, particularly in this world of doctors only having such a short time and one problem only, please, you know, I didn't put it all together, you know, you know, for myself. So how, you know, it's just not how we think. But, you know, I think our bodies like balance. So if one thing is out, it makes everything else much more difficult. But the other thing I was going to say is that I think when you're feeling like that, we rely on our old coping mechanisms, which might be having a glass of wine because you're feeling more stressed or low. That might be, where's the bar of chocolate? Which might be, oh God, I need some carbs. You know, sit on the sofa, I don't feel like exercising. And again, I think I see women being very mean on themselves about that. And I do think when you're going through this time of fluctuation, you do need to be kind to yourself, because it is a real thing and it's a real hormonal drive, but equally to realize that those things are the very things that are going to make you feel worse rather than better. And that if you can try and break that cycle, it will really help. Equally, I see some women who feel so awful, and we're back to the HRT thing now, that they do need to stabilize their hormones to then begin to do all the other things, which are then going to be, you know, because HRT is just, it's one bit, it's one tiny bit. It might be the sort of foundation, but it is not a replacement for all of the other lifestyle things you need to do. But sometimes you do need it to just get to a place of being able to function and think about any of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So if a woman was listening to this and she's thinking, okay, I think I might need that bump to get going, you know, I am experiencing all these symptoms, you know, what would they need to know about HRT? It kind of comes back to that question, you know, like, what is it?
Let's actually answer the original question.
No, I love, honestly, because it just,
what you said, really brilliant.
We both love this conversation. It's going to be so incredibly helpful to our listeners. So there's no rushing through this stuff at all. So it's really, really valid conversation. So yeah, just if that woman was thinking, you know, this resonates with me, I might be thinking about HRT. Could you just explain what the basics of it is and who it might be for?
So basically, first and foremost, what you're doing is giving back some estrogen. So when you're in perimenopause and your hormones are fluctuating, it's going to stabilize out the troughs of your hormones. And when you are at the end of perimenopause and postmenopause, it's going to give you back some estrogen. What it is not trying to do is to exactly replicate what your own ovaries would do, because they go from, you know, pretty low 100 to 200 level of estrogen at the start of your cycle up to 1000 to 2000 mid-cycle. What we try and do is just keep estrogen levels sort of ticking along at a base of about 300. And I say that because I think it helps to know that actually your body doesn't need a huge amount to feel better. So estrogen really is the prime hormone in terms of symptoms and in terms of long-term health protection. So we know that if you take estrogen within 10 years of finishing your periods, that it protects your bone density, massively reducing your risk of osteoporosis. We know that it can halve your risk of heart disease and stroke. Really interesting data from the States about reduction in dementia risk of up to 70%. That's quite controversial. The British Menopause Society are not fans at the moment of that, but it's impressive epidemiological data. Improves diabetes, improves metabolism. So you've got estrogen is the thing. If you think that it's those fluctuating and low levels that cause the symptoms, then actually sorting that out is the thing that makes everything feel better. So whereas with other menopause treatments, you may be looking at sort of fixing one bit or one symptom, this really is getting to the heart of what the issue is. So it makes you feel better and has a long-term health benefit. And as I say, estrogen is the prime hormone for that. But for women who have a womb, one of the things that estrogen does in the body is that estrogen stimulates the lining of the womb to grow, and it does that for a biological reason, because it's getting ready for an egg to come in. It's creating a nice fluffy duvet. But estrogen's the body's partner hormone to estrogen is progesterone, and progesterone's really, its role in the body is all about getting an egg to fertilize and looking after that fertilized egg until the placenta forms. So it has a sort of a relatively narrow spectrum of action in the body. But it's protective in terms of the lining of the womb. So for women who have a womb, you need to take progesterone, because otherwise, if we stimulate the lining of your womb over a period of time, it can cause abnormal growth of the lining of the womb, and worst case scenario, increase your risk of womb cancer by about 10 times over a 10-year period. So it is important to take a progesterone. When you are still having periods, we would mimic what your body would naturally do. So progesterone is normally produced in the second half of the cycle. So we top up that progesterone in the second half of the cycle, but you would take estrogen the whole way through. So that's called a sequential or a cyclical regime, and you're still going to bleed and have periods on that regime. For women who have finished their periods or having very sporadic periods once every 3 to 6 months, we will try to give that progesterone continuously all the time to act a bit like, so always think like estrogen is the fertilizer on your grass and progesterone is the lawnmower. And so a bit like when you're like, you're doing a Premiership football, if you're mowing the lawn every day, it's keeping everything nice and thin, and you're not going to get any bleeding. But that only works if your own ovaries are quite quiet, because if you've got your own ovaries and progesterone in the background and you try and do that regime, what normally happens is that you just spotty bleed all over the place. So that's why women will be on different regimes, so either a cyclical regime or on a continuous regime. So main HRT, estrogen and progesterone. So then what about, is all HRT the same? What about the headlines of 20 years ago about breast cancer? I think this is a very, very important thing to know about HRT, is that all HRT is not the same. So 20 years ago, when the Women's Health Initiative study was done, it was a big study done in the States. It was a good study, although it was aiming to look at older women taking HRT, so 60-plus-year-olds. That study mainly used synthetic oral HRT. And that was because that was what was available at the time. And what that study showed was that in women who take only estrogen, so women who'd had a hysterectomy, essentially, then they had a lower risk of breast cancer. And I say that first because that wasn't widely publicised.
No, not at all.
They also showed that women who took a combination, so an estrogen and a progesterone, were at a higher risk of being diagnosed with breast cancer. And I pick my words carefully, because the risk was of being diagnosed, not of dying from. So, and it showed roughly the easiest way to think about it is if you took 1,000 women, 23 women in that 1,000 women over a 10-year period will get breast cancer, an extra 4 women if you take a combined HRT that contains a synthetic progesterone.
Right.
So that needs to be compared to having a glass of wine every night, which is 4 extra women. Having a BMI of over 30 gives you an 8 to 9 times risk. So I think that's like 20 extra women. So we do need to put that risk into context, but that risk is there, you know, and I think with that old-fashioned HRT, that risk was there. But the other thing that people don't know about that study is that they continue to look at those women 20 years later. When they looked at the women who had taken the combined HRT, they had lower all-cause mortality from everything, including breast cancer, than the women who hadn't.
Wow,
so, and this was the study that stopped us prescribing HRT, and you know, it's understandable why, but I think it's more nuanced than purely a decision to say HRT is bad, and this idea we have in our mind that estrogen was bad, and also this idea that women feel like their HRT gave them breast cancer. You know, you still look at those statistics and see the majority of those women who got a breast cancer who were taking HRT would probably have got it anyway. But let's fast forward 20 years. And what's happened in the last 20 years is 2 really important things. The first thing that we've learned is that if you take estrogen through the skin, so as a patch, a gel, or a spray, or an implant, it avoids the liver processing it. So if you take it by mouth, it goes through the gut and through the liver. The liver is not designed to process estrogen. It doesn't really know what it's doing with it, and it makes it more toxic. So it activates clotting factors in the liver, and it activates something called the renin-angiotensin system, which is your blood pressure control system. So it raises blood pressure. So with oral HRT, you have an increased risk of blood clots, and you have an increased risk of stroke and potentially heart attack, which is why many women who've had a history of clotting disorders, who have migraines, who are at higher risk of stroke and heart attack, have been told that they can't take HRT. If you take estrogen through the skin, you avoid that liver metabolism, much in the same way as when your ovaries produce estrogen, go straight into the blood unchanged. No activation of clotting factors, no activation of the blood pressure system. So those risks are then removed, meaning that through the skin estrogen is safe for those women who previously couldn't take it. Okay, and that's British Menopause Society endorsed. So really helpful to know that. The other thing we have learned is that if we use a natural hormone, and when I say natural, I mean mainly made from plants, so yams or soya are the main sources. The molecular structure of that natural hormone is almost identical to the stuff that our ovaries produce. So whilst it's lovely that it's natural, what's actually important is that you're replacing like for like, and the body recognizes it as its own, so it is better tolerated. And always our hope was that it would be safer, and we now have the body of evidence that says exactly that. So if we use a combination of a through the skin estrogen, natural, tend to be called body identical hormone, progesterone, as well as the body identical estrogen, then the risk of breast cancer comes right down. So there's a big study done in France in 2015, and that showed a very small increased risk, so 1.2 times your breast cancer risk of diagnosis, as opposed to 2 to 3 times with the synthetic stuff, depending on which synthetic hormone you used. There have been 2 subsequent studies that have showed no increased risk with using body identical natural progesterone. In the UK, there's only 1 natural body identical progesterone on the market to be taken orally, and that's called Utrogestan. You'll hear it also called a micronized progesterone. The other alternative is that you take the progesterone via a hormone releasing coil. The brand name that most people know is Mirena, although others are available. And that releases a synthetic hormone, levonorgestrel, straight into the womb. But because it's going straight into the womb, you have significantly lower blood levels. It's better tolerated than most synthetic oral progesterones, which, by the way, are often the reason why people couldn't take the pill and felt awful on it and felt moody and had breast tenderness, not the estrogen, the synthetic progesterone. But so often tolerated much better, incredibly useful for women who are having horrible heavy periods with perimenopause, because it tends to, well, it reduces, improves bleeding in about 90% of women, but also the breast cancer risk comes right down again. So if you are going to take HRT, you essentially want to take a through the skin estrogen, and you combined with either a micronized progesterone, which can be taken orally or vaginally, alongside a hormone containing coil. So that is the basis of HRT.
Fantastic stuff there.
Unbelievably so fascinating.
Because I think
unbelievably fascinating.
A lot of people are still quite hung up on those old studies, from the early days of HRT. But obviously, medical science has moved on fantastic, like you're saying. Like the main difference there, using synthetic forms of hormones, and now we have natural forms. We have different modes of application. We can put them topically. We don't have to take them orally. And we can. I think
it's just that it's not all the same, and we can't see it as the same. And that's been a lot of the trouble. You'll remember a few years ago, there was the Lancet published a study that said, the breast cancer risk is still there. And again, what they did is they just lumped everything together, and they didn't break out the different groups. And so it's really hard to understand. So we shouldn't ignore the old studies, because they're helpful, especially because, coming back to that lack of GP education, if you are doing a little bit of an eeny, meeny, miny, mo in the BNF, all of those synthetic oral combinations are still available to prescribe. And you may very well think, for a woman, well, it's much easier to take a pill than it is to put on a patch or rub in and take a Utrogestan. So often they are still prescribed, and I would say we really ideally shouldn't be prescribing them first line. There are some women who do need them. So the only thing with through the skin estrogen is that our skin is different. Our guts absorb very predictably, our skin doesn't. And so some women just don't absorb through the skin very well. So may need oral. And my other caveat is that if you're a woman who is stable and feeling well on any form of HRT or all HRT, don't suddenly decide to stop it or swap it on listening to this, because the other thing I'd say about the risk of blood clots and blood pressure is, if you stop then decide you feel awful and want to restart, every time you restart, your liver goes into overdrive again with it. So actually your biggest risk is in the first 3 to 6 months, and then the risk goes down. So you don't want to be starting and stopping oral medication. And that's the same with the oral contraceptive. This idea we used to have of having a break is a bad thing. You probably need to be on it or off it. That's not the same with through the skin estrogen, which I always say, again, one of the beauties of it is that you're in control. You're in control of how much you put in. It's fine to stop it. It lasts in your body for 48 hours. So, you may make a choice to try, but you can make a choice to stop. So there's lots of advantages to through the skin. But again, I don't want women to suddenly go into a panic if they're on other HRT. And to still remember that if you're on a synthetic progesterone and you're feeling well on it, that in real life your risk of breast cancer remains really quite low, and no more so. If you're looking after yourself, if you're not drinking, if you're exercising, then you can modify other lifestyle factors.
Yes. That's the thing, isn't it? It's those other lifestyle modifications that you can make.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff. I guess we've covered there kind of what HRT is, who it's suitable for, the benefits. I guess the question is, are there any potential downsides or people it's not suitable for, and how long can someone stay on it?
So there are, interestingly, And we talked a little bit about those people who can't take oral HRT. And as I say, I see a lot of women who have been told that they can't. I'm going to bust another myth about endometriosis, because again, I hear a lot of women who have endometriosis told that they can't take HRT. You do have to be more careful with women with endometriosis, and you need to understand the degree of endometriosis and potentially have a conversation with a gynecologist as well. But for most women, if you're taking a combination of estrogen and progesterone, it's absolutely fine. For women who've had a hysterectomy for endometriosis, they normally need to continue to take progesterone to stop any endometrial deposits from reactivating. So it's a little, there's caveats with endometriosis, but it's not a no. So then when we come into the true contraindications, there are only a handful. So the first one is if you've got an active breast cancer. So breast cancer itself will use estrogen to grow if it's actually there. So if you've got a breast cancer, and I would normally say if you're within 3 years of a diagnosis of a breast cancer, certainly a hormone sensitive breast cancer, probably a no to HRT. Treatment otherwise, that's a whole nother one to come and talk about. So you've had a history of breast cancer and your menopausal, what do you do? So active breast cancer, an active blood clot. So if you've had a pulmonary embolus or a DVT in the last 3 months, if you've had a heart attack in the last 6 months, if you have active liver disease that is affecting your liver's function, so i.e. you're in liver failure, and a weird skin condition called porphyria cutaneous tarda. So those are the contraindications. The other thing that lots of women will say to me is, or if you've had a hormone dependent cancer, other cancer. So lots of women think cancer full stop stops them from having it. No, lots of women think gynae cancer. So for example, having had cervical cancer means they can't take it. Having had ovarian cancer means they can't take it. Actually, there's only one of the forms of ovarian cancer, endometrioid cancer, that is you have to be careful with. But otherwise, cervical cancer, vulval cancer, endometrial cancer, all of those cancers that have been treated are not contraindications for HRT. So hopefully that's covered who can, who can't. Happy to answer if there's any other more specific questions that your listeners have. Happy to
I think
lots of people told with high blood pressure they can't have it. Of course, through the skin, absolutely fine. You don't even need blood pressure monitoring if you're on through the skin, because it doesn't affect blood pressure. In fact, it can actually lower blood pressure because it helps those blood vessels be more elastic.
Yes.
And how long can you stay on it? Once you put on it, how long can you continue it?
So it is a little bit how long is a piece of string and why are you using it? So if you are using it for symptoms, then the sensible thing is to say you want to get to that time when your hormones have stopped fluctuating, because that tends to be the worst time for symptoms. So normally I would say to a woman until sort of 55 for symptoms, or if they're later starting with their symptoms, 5 years, is going to be sort of going to help you to know, are these symptoms because of fluctuations but symptoms. HRT does not postpone the menopause. Your ovaries are still going to shut down in the background, but for women who have symptoms on stopping, those symptoms are because they are the symptoms that their body is going to have, either with hormone levels that are still fluctuating because you've stopped while that's still happening, or symptoms of low estrogen. So this idea that symptoms completely go away in the perimenopause is, I mean, it physiologically it doesn't make sense, does it? Because your estrogen levels have changed, but they tend to be different. So as I say, down below symptoms, dryness, itching, being uncomfortable, muscle and joint aches, sleep, brain function tend to come in more to the fore in postmenopause. So Say 5 years for symptoms. If we're looking at long-term health, I would say you want to give your body 10 years ideally, so you want to shift the curve back by 10 years. My caveat to that is to say, you know, the NICE guidance does not give any timeframes. The NICE guidance says that women should be evaluated annually and their individual risk benefit looked at each time. So that's what NICE tells us we should be doing. Lots of doctors talk about 5 years. You know, after 5 years, you've got to stop. I think that's largely based on the initial Women's Health Initiative study that said the breast cancer risk started at 5 years. I mean, I tend to say to women, if you're going to take it, accept that there's a small breast cancer risk, but the 5 years otherwise is forget that. And then, but so, I mean, I would say for lots of women, if you think physiologically, our ovaries previously would have stopped 2 or 3 years before we died. There is no reason why you couldn't continue to take HRT up until a point where you can't remember to take it. You know, there is no reason not to. And there may be many reasons to. And equally, that whole, we talked about the ideal window of opportunity starting when you're perimenopausally has got the best evidence about long-term health gain, but taking it within 10 years of stopping your periods. But what happens if you feel like you've missed that window? Because there's a lot of women who will say, I didn't take it because I was petrified. Oh my goodness, have I missed an opportunity? For symptom control, you can start HRT at any point. The oldest woman I've started on HRT is in her 90s. I mean, I think she probably had missed the boat, but she wanted to try it. And actually, she's allowed to make that decision as long as you're not explained to her the pros and cons. So you can start at any time. But the key is, going back to my light analogy, if you're in a dark room and someone comes in and they turn the light bulbs on, and they turn every light bulb on, you are going to be blinded, aren't you? It's going to feel horrible. So if you suddenly flood your body with estrogen, it's going to make you feel rotten and your body is not going to like it. And we know that there is a small increased risk of having a heart attack in the first 6 months because you can get a rupture of any pre-existing plaques in your blood vessels if you go in with a high dose. If you use the dimmer switch, if you use through the skin estrogen, starting very low and allowing your body to adjust. It is safe. British Menopause Society just published guidance on this, and can help symptoms. And you know, a 3-month trial will help you to know, does this make me feel better or not? So you know, we shouldn't be not prescribing.
It's so fascinating. It's so fascinating. Like, just, you know, what James went through with me last year, it was horrible for him to see as well, because my mood was just, you know, really up and down, the energy levels, the lack of sleep, I was having heart palpitations, I was having all these, and just
so many cardiac receptors in our hearts.
Yes,
so many women misdiagnosed,
and my lungs weren't playing ballies, and I was thinking, what's going on? And I think it's that, I think it's the word permission is where I'm going with this. It's listening to someone like you, and even for me, I'm sitting here thinking, I've just been given permission to potentially explore this, even though I'm not on the floor. You know, I don't have to be dragging myself to go and see Katie. by the time I
you know, I think that, again, this old idea of only take HRT if your symptoms are very, very, very severe, and, you know, put up with it and take it for the shortest period of time. You know, wait until, I hear so many women who've been told, just wait until you feel worse.
No. Great advice. Wait till you feel worse.
But we don't really know what worse is.
No. And life, and often these things they're so insidious because of the nature of menopause and its multitude.
Like, you feel fine one day,
exactly.
and then the next.
And then James,
and so you're not, you know, you wait until you're absolutely on the floor, and you know, and of course it is going to take you more time to get back. I mean, says the woman who literally who hadn't slept for 3 years, and still my HRT sat in my cupboard for 3 months before I took it. So, you know, again, I want to say that because I don't think it is a small decision to take HRT. And I think a bit like when I gave my son his MMR injection, I knew the evidence, I knew that it was safe, and I was still petrified. And that's how I felt with HRT, and that is natural, you know, I think. But you know, I thought, well, you know, I can't, I know that if I continue not to sleep, I'm not going to be able to work, I'm being a rubbish mum, you know,
it's utterly debilitating, and it affects obviously your food choices, obviously your stress hormones, coursing through your blood system, which causes all sorts of issues and making it all compound.
Exactly, long-term health risk is huge. And you know, and this is not the thing for everybody, but for me, literally overnight my sleep improved. And I actually was just like, is this the most powerful placebo that I've ever known? But it's but I think and you know, the stories I get again and again for women is, my goodness, I hadn't really appreciated how bad I was feeling until I now feel better. And I didn't really think this was going to work. And it has. The other thing my caveat to that is, you know, there are women who are just like, oh my God, it's my miracle cure. And then there are the rest of us who live real lives and are like, you know, it absolutely allows me to be more stable, but I still have my ups and downs, and life still happens, and I still am moody sometimes, and I'm still get COVID. And that was the other thing I said I was going to say, didn't I?
Yes,
it's really interesting study.
Right,
yes,
listen to this.
So, really interesting research that came out of their first wave of the pandemic. So women taking HRT were 50% less likely to be hospitalized than those who weren't. So estrogen is important for our immune systems, and it's also for all of our cancer scares. It's also important for this thing called apoptosis, which is like the body's sort of stock taking of cells. So all the time the body's going through our cells, weeding out any abnormal cells and killing them. That's called apoptosis. Estrogen's really important for that process. So fascinating, important for immunity, important for apoptosis. But please also do take your vitamin D and do take your magnesium.
Yes. Oh, Katie, I love this. I was wondering whether we should actually get Katie on to talk about that.
I think we should. This is fascinating, and there's so much more we want to talk about, but I'm very aware of the time.
Yes. So,
I told you I'd talk too much.
No, Katie, it's amazing. It's absolutely what you've been saying has been.
And I know this is really going to resonate with our audience.
Beautiful, quite frankly, even like selfishly for myself. The final question, really, we'll talk about. We're going to get you back on. We're already going to earmark you for another time to talk about testosterone replacement therapy another time, because that's a whole other thing that is out there at the moment that we need to talk about. But the final question, I suppose, which we've already answered briefly throughout this podcast, is: should HRT also be backed by lifestyle changes to make the most of it?
I mean, I think
we know,
It's not
a magic pill.
It's a foundation, but not a magic cure-all.
Absolutely. So those lifestyle modifications are really, really important, listeners. But hopefully this has given you so much food for thought. Hopefully,
you know, listen to this one 2 or 3 times over, I think.
Absolutely. But, go back, grab your notepad and pen and go make some notes on this. And Katie, thank you for all the work that you are doing for women. This is really, really important. I think it's so wonderful that women now have access to the likes of you and likes to this information. I think it's why we thought it was so important to have this podcast episode with you, because we do get asked a lot, because obviously we talk about the perimenopause and menopause and the andropause from those lifestyle modifications, from the food, the gut health and the movement, but it's HRT isn't something that we know very much about at all, but we get asked a lot.
We know more now.
Are you are you pro HRT? Are you against HRT? And we always say we are not pro and against anything. You know, it's about being informed and empowered with the right information, going and speaking to the right people, putting it out there and choosing what's best for you with the right information.
And the only way you can do that is with knowledge.
Exactly.
A quick, and not a plug, but a quick thing. If women want to know more,
how can people reach out to you and get hold of you?
Well, so people want to reach out to me. My website, www.clinic51.co.uk, is the home of the clinic. But there's lots of useful information, and it doesn't try and be a site that gives you all the information, but gives you links to lots of other good sources, because I do feel like, oh my goodness, there is so much out there. It can feel completely overwhelming. So don't, sit at 11 o'clock at night Googling too much. Try and find a couple of trusted sources. And so there are some trusted sources on my website, including Louise Newson's brilliant Balance website, which is fantastic. And also, I just want to say, I think if you read one book and only one book, I would read Kate Muir's book, Everything You Need to Know About Menopause and You're Too Afraid to Ask. She's the woman who behind the Davina documentaries, the producer of those. And I just think she's an investigative journalist. It's written really well, and it's really clear outset of the evidence.
Amazing.
Fantastic.
Amazing.
Katie, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Our listeners are going to find that really fascinating. We'll put
my pleasure.
The website in the show notes.
I didn't cough once either.
Oh no! Do you know what?
Well, I hope you shake that COVID off.
Yes, Katie. We're
get to enjoy some of the weekend while it's still going.
We're doing this on Zoom as well, and I am actually going to tell you that Katie still looks utterly. We're going to use audio obviously for the podcast, but Katie still looks utterly gorgeous and glamorous this morning. Well, I've got no makeup on. She's turned up looking lovely. So if that's her COVID face, thank you again.
Thank you so much.
And we'll put the links to. And all the links in the show notes, and we hope that you enjoyed that. Sending you so much love out there. Mwah!
Yeah.
You've been listening to the Midlife Mentors with Claire and James Davis.
We'd love to hear from you. So drop us a line at info@themidlifementors.com with any questions or topic suggestions.
And make sure you join us on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can find us under the Midlife Mentors.
Yeah. What? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.